Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Sarah Wayne Callies. I am an actor, writer, and director, and I am a citizen of Earth, and I am someone who believes in science. It's a funny thing to have to say all of those things, but it's incredibly relevant today, and this is why we're here. Thank you again for being with us. I'm happy to join. I'm looking at this and I'm reading it so I get it right. The Earth Day 2021 virtual stage with the Earth Day Initiative and March for Science, NYC. It's kind of silly that we have to have a March for Science. You'd think we would all be on the same page about this by now, but here we are gathering everybody together to get on the same page because the only way out of the mess that we're in is through the science. We have today Besty Sutherland to talk about the importance of prioritizing science and facts in environmental policy. Again, if anything should go without saying, it's science and facts in environmental policy. But since these days it hasn't gone without saying, Besty, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me today.
I appreciate you bringing your expertise, your brain, your heart, your passion to all of this. Could you introduce yourself for folks so that they understand the incredible service you've been giving the country for so long?
I have a PhD in environmental science and engineering, and I joined EPA in 1984 and worked for 33 years in the both the water and the Superfund programs. I retired in August of 2017 as a director of the Office of Science and Technology in EPA's National Water Program. And when I retired, I released my farewell speech publicly. And it really went viral because at that point we were just 7 months into the Trump administration. And this was really the first warning from an EPA insider about all the public health protections that potentially we could lose during this administration. Unfortunately, it turns out my warning was not exaggerated in any respect. We actually lost over 80 public health protective regulations during the 4 years of the Trump administration.
Which is heartbreaking and crazy. For those of us like myself who are on the outside, I don't think I realized that those laws could be, those protections could be stripped away so quickly. Could you walk me through briefly what a couple of them maybe were to give people a sense of kind of the scope of what was going on?
Yeah, so originally we thought, because of the campaign rhetoric, that when President Trump came in, he would attack the regulations that were addressing climate change. Turned out that was a vast underestimate. Actually, the Trump political team at EPA targeted every single media office that we had. So they actually repealed or weakened protections under air, water, and land. And just to give you a couple of examples, in air, of course, we all do know this, that they lowered the fuel economy standards for cars and trucks, and they weakened all the air pollution controls on power plants. But what maybe many people don't know is they also went after the Clean Water Act, and they removed federal water quality protections from over half of the wetlands in the country and over 20% of the streams, the small streams and rivers in the country. They also refused to ban a neurotoxic pesticide or to ban a deadly paint stripper. And even towards the end of the administration, they repealed safety requirements designed to prevent explosions and accidental releases of hazardous substances from chemical and petroleum plants. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a total of 80 of these.
80. I'm assuming that none of these are in the interest of public health and welfare.
Every single one of them, as far as we can tell from excellent reporting that was done during the time, they were all done at the request of political donors to the Trump campaign. And so sometimes even industry leaders that were supposedly the beneficiary of some of these rollbacks were actually opposed themselves because they went too far.
Wow. So it maybe not overstating things to say that health and safety of America's air and water and the people and the creatures that live in it possibly mortgaged to the Trump financial interests who supported his campaign?
There's a recent article, just February of this year, in a medical journal called The Lancet, in which the authors analyzed all the Trump EPA rollbacks, all of them, not just the air ones, but the ones in water and land also. And they came up with the estimate that in 2019 in the United States, we had 22,000 excess deaths because of those Trump rollbacks. And that's just the current effect. We also have a big analysis by the Rhodium Group that looked at all the rollback of the air pollution regulations during the Trump era. And they calculated that as a result, an extra 1.8 billion tons of additional greenhouse gases will be spewed into the atmosphere by 2035. The impacts have been devastating.
Okay, so just to restate that, because it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, 22,000 additional deaths in 2019 because of the rollbacks of EPA protections by the Trump administration. Okay, there's a bunch to talk about here, but the next thing that I want to ask is, how do you see those patterns continue to play out, right? So you're there, it's 7 months into the administration, you get these rollbacks, you retire. How does this continue to play out over the last few years?
So as soon as I retired, I joined the Environmental Protection Network. It's a brand new bipartisan organization of former EPA career staff and political appointees. And we tracked throughout the 4 years of the Trump term everything that the Trump EPA did and tried to explain to the public, to press, and to congressional subcommittees exactly what the impacts were. In addition to rolling back final rules that had been on the books for years, they also went after trying to put constraints on all future rulemaking at EPA. And so let me just explain that. One of the things that Scott Pruitt, the first administrator of EPA, did was he threw all the university scientists off of our influential science advisory boards and replaced them with industry scientists, so that you would have, a very biased expert peer review process. And then, even worse than that, if there could be worse, both Scott Pruitt and Andrew Wheeler, the second administrator of EPA, promulgated two really horrific rules. One rule prohibited EPA from using most of the epidemiology studies on health effects of pollutants, prohibited them. Only EPA prohibited from using those studies. And then the second rule they promulgated was to prohibit EPA from being able to document a number of the benefits of environmental regulations. So again, the effort there was not only would they reverse everything that had been done in the past, but they would hamstring everything for the future.
And then gut the agencies, even their ability to evaluate what's happened.
Correct, with the peer review process so biased.
This sounds like a Batman villain. I mean, honestly, like it sounds just so blatantly ugly and dangerous for everyone. Where do we go from here? What's next? How do we restore the science and the academics in our policy and our government, so that we can get back to a place of making decisions based on science and not based on financial contributions to campaigns?
So that's the most important question of all. And we've all given this a lot of thought. Again, it's not just EPA. It's the CDC that we've all experienced through this pandemic. It's our Interior Department, our NASA, our NOAA. Every federal agency has experienced political interference or suppression of scientific facts. So what we really need to do, we need an all government approach. All three branches of government have got to make scientific integrity a real activating principle for them. So for example, Congress with their oversight hearings can really focus from now on the scientific foundation of agency actions. The courts have actually been the savior from the standpoint of the EPA rollbacks. Every single Trump EPA rollback was litigated by environmental groups and in some cases state attorneys general. And in the vast majority of the cases, the courts have sided with them against the Trump EPA rollbacks. And that is because those rollbacks were not based on the best available science or the best available economic justification. So they lost in court. So the courts, we need them. But most importantly and most efficiently, we need to have every federal agency in our government implement a strong scientific integrity policy. A scientific integrity policy is designed to ensure that scientists are protected when they're doing their research so they can share their results freely with other scientists without fear of retaliation. A scientific integrity policy also has specific procedures to prevent political suppression and alteration of scientific work. And then once we have every agency with a strong policy, we need to have that agency train all of their career and political appointees. They need to train their grantees and their contractors to make sure everybody understands their roles and responsibility to preserve scientific integrity. And then finally, I think you need a scientific integrity officer in every federal agency who has the power and independence to really investigate allegations of misconduct and to seek redress for any violations of the scientific integrity policy. That's our only way of going forward. And again, it's not just for EPA, it's for every agency.
You know, first of all, thank you for the work you've done and thank you for these thoughts, because for someone like me who's standing on the outside of government and policy, you're breaking this down in a way that I can understand and in a way that feels actionable. It also, what I'm hearing you say in some ways is that we as citizens, as the people who vote in the government, need to start thinking about, you know, we have this idea of the separation of church and state. Maybe we need also to have an understanding of the separation of science and the government, that science needs to be an independently functioning, honored place, and that the government's job is to listen to science, not to determine what science says. That's a way of keeping our waterways safe, our air safe, the human population safe, the global population safe, and you know, all the living things, which is, you know, it's what we're doing here, right? It's Earth Day. It's the March for Science. Thank you for your thoughts. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I'm deeply, deeply grateful for you bringing these issues to the fore and in the way that, you know, the rest of us can understand.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think the virtual stage is going to be a wonderful event for everybody to really recommit themselves to the environmental protection of this country.
Mm-hmm. And maybe also the intellectual protection of the scientists who are doing the work. So Betsy, thank you again. Thank you for your words today. Thank you for your service. To everybody out there, that's an aloha and farewell from those of us here from this Earth Day virtual stage.